Well, I think we're going to make a start. My name's Matt. I'm the Chief Executive of Masorti Judaism. Welcome to this session. I'm really proud that I'll hand over to our speakers in just a second, but first I'd like to say that I'm really proud that we're hosting this first ever event actually of the newly formed Masorti LGBT plus network. It's wonderful to have so many people here, and it's exciting that we're able to do this. If you would like, as we said before, if you would like to make a donation to support the work we're doing, building inclusive, welcoming communities, you can still do that. If you're already given and you'd like to give a bit more, you're also invited to do that. You can make a one-off donation, you can make a monthly donation if you'd like to spread the cost. Every pound counts. Please do give as generous as you can. I'm putting a link to donate now into the chat box, so please be as generous as you can, and thank you so much in advance for doing that. I'd now like to hand over to Dr. Daniella Shaw. Danielle is a member of a new doctor, I should say, who received her PhD in the last week. I hope you don't mind me sharing Daniella, Mazal Tov. Danielle is a member of New North London Synagogue. She's one of the founders of New North London's new-ish LGBT plus network, and founder of what's going to expand from that into a Masorti movement-wide LGBT plus network. So thank you for the work you've been doing on that with some of your friends and colleagues, Daniella. It's, like I said before, it's really exciting, and I'm proud that we can host this inaugural event, and I'll hand over to you for the rest of the session. Thank you. One technical announcement is this: the best way to view this session, I think, is if you go to the top right corner of your screen, if you're on a computer, and press view, I would suggest that you go to speaker view. If you're on speaker view, then whoever is speaking will pop up in the large window on your screen, and you'll be able to see them most clearly. If you prefer to see the whole audience, you can be on gallery view. That's also going to work fine, but speaker view is probably the clearest way of doing that. And with that very exciting technical announcement, I'll hand back over to Daniella. Thank you, Daniella.
Thank you, Matt. And thank you for doing the donation blurb, which you did better than I would have done, but donate, just to reinforce that. Yeah, as Matt said, this is the first Masorti LGBT plus network event that we've done across the Masorti movement, as opposed to shul specific. We set up the network after Pride last year, where we held a Pride Shabbat in New North London Synagogue. The network is a welcoming group that meets regularly for social events, workshops, celebrations, and finds ways to mark and celebrate LGBT plus identities in a Masorti Jewish context. I co-facilitate the network along with another New North London member, Ruti Amel, who has just put in the chat very efficiently our email address, which is lgbt@masorti.org.uk. So if you've got any questions or you want to join us or support us, then please just email us on that email address. Today, we are really fortunate to have an amazing panel of LGBT plus identifying rabbis from across the globe, from the UK, Israel, and from the States. I'll do a brief introduction, and I'm going to then pass over to our speakers. I've got some questions that I will be posing to our panel. Time is quite short. I hope we'll also be able to open up questions. Actually, some people had sent some in advance as well. But feel free to send a message in the chat to me directly or open, and I'll try and get to what I can. So on our wonderful panel today, we have originally from Liverpool, Rabbi Mikey Goldstein, who made Aliyah in 1989. He was ordained at the Jewish Theological Seminary in New York, where he also interned at the congregation Beit Simchat Torah, which is the world's largest LGBTQ synagogue. He's now a rabbi at Adat Shalom Emmanuel, the Masorti congregation in Rehovot, Israel. Rav Mikey, as he's known to his congregants, is the Israel region president of the Rabbinical Assembly and sits on the board of Israel's Masorti movement and the Shechter Rabbinical Seminary. There are many other things that time is too short to mention, I'm afraid, Rav Mikey. Rabbi Kerry Chaplin is a spiritual counselor at Beit Shuvah in LA. She was previously a rabbinic fellow with Lab Shul in New York, where she co-created justice and peace-centered rituals. She's also served as a rabbinic intern at Hillel at UCLA and director of Jewish life at Vassar College. Rabbi Kerry was ordained in 2015 at Ziegler School of Rabbinic Studies and lives with her wife, Julia, her daughter, Frankie, who I had the great pleasure of having a nice Zoom chat with the other day, and I'm very sorry she's not joined us today, and their cats. Rabbi Aaron Weininger serves as Rabbi of Adath Yeshurun congregation in Minnetonka, Minnesota. He was ordained at the Jewish Theological Seminary in 2012. In 2017, he became the first openly gay person admitted to the rabbinical school in the conservative movement. He's entering his third year too as co-chair of the Minnesota Rabbinical Association. And finally, and closest to home, we have Rabbi Natasha Man. Born in Hertfordshire to a lively interreligious and intercultural family, Rabbi Natasha joined New London Synagogue by herself as a teenager, where she studied with Rabbi Jeremy Gordon. After a theology degree, Rabbi Natasha learnt at the Conservative Yeshiva in Jerusalem and worked on human trafficking issues. She was ordained at the Ziegler School of Rabbinic Studies in 2019, and she now serves as rabbi at New London Synagogue and one Shabbat a month with Mosaic Masorti. Can you all please make sure that you are muted unless you are one of our panelists, and even though you might want to mute while others are speaking. Thank you very much. So to start with, let's start with your big stories. So we're not all spotlighted, so I'll just pick on you one at a time if you don't mind. But if you could tell us a bit about your story, and if you are open to telling us about your intersecting journey as a queer or LGBT plus identifying person, and your journey to being a rabbi, that would be great. And whether there was anything along that journey of intersecting identities that might have surprised you. We're going to start, if you don't mind, with Rav Mikey.
Hi, thank you, Dr. Daniella. It's great to see that you got your doctorate. So mazal tov on that. So as you heard, I'm originally from Liverpool. I grew up in Bnei Akiva, the religious Zionist youth movement, and at an early enough age, 11, 12, whatever, I understood that I was attracted to boys and not to girls. But in the bubble that I grew up in, there was nothing really I could do with that. There was no one to speak to, no one to whatever. It was just something I had to keep to myself. And I went to a relatively religious school in Manchester for high school, Manchester Jewish Grammar School. So as you can imagine, understanding about myself being gay was something that was just for me by myself. And I came to Israel at the age of 17 to go to yeshiva for a couple of years. I did the army as well. And all this time, I'm like in this bubble where there's nothing I can do about being gay. And then I went back to England. I went to University of Manchester. And I always remember looking at the Jewish Society notice board, standing in front of it, and having my eyes move slightly to the left to the GLBT Society to see what was on their notice board. But of course, not having, I still wasn't ready to go and go to such a, it's like, how could I go to such a society? And they're all non-Jewish anyway. So it's like, I didn't know how to, I mean, I knew how to interact with non-Jews, but it just wasn't, I was not a place to be. And it was only really when I moved to Israel, I came on Aliyah in 89 to Jerusalem, and I met a number of other gay guys who were from various religious backgrounds, whether they were Orthodox, Reform, Conservative from the States. And suddenly I was able to see that there's a place to be Jewish, and there's a place to be gay as well. But still in Jerusalem in the early 90s, you know, unless you went to the Reform shul, whatever, then that was the only place to go to. And that wasn't where I felt at home. And for me, it was just easier to become less religious. And then in 2002, I was looking for a job. I was a fundraiser by that point, and Masorti Israel were looking for someone to head their fundraising department. And in applying for the job, I also started to read up, because I didn't know in England during obviously the 80s, 70s, 80s, there was no Masorti movement as there is today. And I didn't know much about conservative in the States. And so I was reading up, and I was thinking, perhaps this is a place where religiously I can move back into being a bit more religious and find a shul that I can go to. And I ended up getting the job, and I joined my local shul in Rehovot. And then in the late, whatever you call them, 2008 to 2010, I was the chairman of the Jerusalem Open House, and which is the LGBT center in Jerusalem. And this type of leadership and being more involved religiously type of led me, thanks to people like Rabbi Aaron Weiniger, who was also a panelist. He was in Israel with his cohort, and I was speaking to them and saying, oh, I'd love to go to rabbinical school. And I had a great excuse, because the Schechter Rabbinical Seminary was not accepting gays and lesbians at the time. But this cohort made sure that this was known in JTS to the people who needed to know. And you know, within a year of speaking to this cohort from the States, I was at JTS studying, and I never knew I wanted to be a rabbi, but everything I did led to that point. And so basically I became a rabbi, and always knew I was coming back to Israel. And I was the first appointed openly gay pulpit rabbi in Masorti in Israel, which is, you know, it's like my shul is great, but not everybody is so great yet in the movement here. And now, as the president of the Israel Regional Rabbinical Assembly, it's difficult sometimes to be at a board meeting where, you know, some of the people there don't think you should be a rabbi. So there are a lot of challenges still ahead. I'll leave it at that, because there's obviously a lot more I could say, but I'll leave it there at this point.
Thank you, Rabbi Mikey. It would be great for us to hear a little bit more about some of those more uncomfortable situations that you find yourself in, and for us to think about how that's different across different global contexts. I'm next going to come to Rabbi Kerry. So if you could unmute yourself and give us a whistle-stop tour of your experience, that would be great. Thank you.
Thanks, Daniella, and also congratulations, Dr. Daniella. I like that. I like that, Mikey. We should do that today. So I'm a spiritual counselor at Beit Tshuva, which is a Jewish addiction treatment center in Los Angeles. And I will say that one thing that is a incredible gift about my work there is the demand, requirement, obligation to live as authentically as possible. That's not true for a lot of jobs where you have to be in front of people, especially rabbi jobs, but all kinds of jobs you have to be in front of people. And I'm really, really grateful to be working where I am, because in, you know, addiction and recovery, the only way through it, the only way to live is to live authentically. Otherwise, the alternative is not living. So I'm with that kind of community right now, and it's a blessing. I grew up in conservative synagogues in Los Angeles and in Boca Raton, Florida. And not a lot of, and I use the word queer, so this is my word. I understand it might not be your word, but not a lot of queer stuff, people, ideas around. And came to it later in college. I went to college with Rabbi Aaron, actually. And we were both a part of a queer Jewish group on campus. And I remember I also kind of came into my Judaism then too as something that was mine and something that that mattered for my living, not just something that I did sometimes. And I remember after a Seder we'd had that was this kind of queer Jewish Seder, and it went on for hours and hours and hours. And we were like, no, like to the staff, you guys go home, it's okay. Cause we were just so in it. And afterwards, folks had mostly left, and I was there with my then girlfriend, and I said to her, I was crying on the couch, and it was because I felt so called to be in my queer self and in my Jewish self, and to do that in a way of leadership and spiritual leadership. And at the time, the conservative movement wasn't yet ordaining openly gay and lesbian people, much less kind of queer people across the spectrum. And it was painful, and that journey was painful for a while. I had some very angry, and I also curse, so if that's not okay, I guess you guys don't have to like me, but like, you know, fuck you moments to the conservative movement. And ultimately, though, found that to live authentically as me, I came back. I did my tshuva with myself, my return with myself, and return with living Judaism. And it's been kind of a windy road professionally also, now that I am a rabbi. Mikey alluded to his experiences with that. I have my own. And the journey of living authentically continues as I explore more of like, what does gender mean for me now? And like, none of this is fixed. But that's really what my experience has been about. How do I live authentically in a way that lets the divine come forward in me and helps the divine come forward in others?
Thank you, Rabbi Kerry. And I think there's, you know, something really interesting that comes out in stories about authenticity, where one authenticity of someone's identity actually comes to fruition along with multiple authenticities. I'm going to move swiftly on to Rabbi Aaron.
Thank you, Dr. Daniella, Mazal Tov, and great to be here with my friends and teachers, with Kerry and Mikey and a new friend, Natasha. So I grew up in a very active Jewish community in New Rochelle, New York. And I didn't really know anything different from that community. I figured this is what Jewish community is, going to shul every week, growing up in a Jewish day school, going to Jewish camp. And along the way, from an early age, in moments of celebration for my family and in moments of crisis for my family, feeling that community surround us and lift us. And, you know, whether it was visiting my family when a family member was very sick, and feeling the support of people showing up with meals and cards. Or, you know, I think about the following year at my bar mitzvah, people dancing and celebrating, and really the joy of that community. And at the same time, probably around the time I was 13, you know, not feeling overt hostility, right? My community, my congregation wasn't overtly hostile, but the messages were very clear. At my bar mitzvah, you know, kind of the rabbi presenting the norm that the next simcha you'll celebrate is when you stand here with your wife. And I could not have articulated at 13 years old that I was gay, but something felt off. I think most 13-year-olds hearing that would be a little frightened, regardless of one's sexuality. But that also was a gift in a way to help me realize at that time I was different, and yet I felt so drawn to be in Jewish community. That was my home. As I said, that was what I knew to be so true about my values, that they were grounded in being with people and being with people in joy and crisis. I would say by the time I was 15, I participated in USY on Wheels, which is a program based in North America, traveling to different communities, doing chesed projects across North America. That cemented my decision to become a rabbi. And as I spent more time in high school and then in college with Kerry, realizing kind of a disconnect. I never had that moment of, you know, God doesn't love me. I always felt that God was with me. It's that people had to catch up to God. And so I always felt deeply rooted in my faith, and somehow people were misreading the tradition. And so it got involved in the Jewish LGBTQ community in college in St. Louis, and found actually mostly in the Reform, Reconstructionist, and Orthodox movements, role models, teachers, advisors, very few in the conservative movement in St. Louis at the time, interestingly. And again, that exposure to other denominations and expressions actually deepened my understanding of pluralism, and the ways in which many people come to a Jewish journey. So long story short, I went to JTS and graduated in 2012, and I've been serving my congregation for almost 9 years. And happy to get more into that later, but that's a brief bio.
Wonderful, thank you. There's something really interesting about the tension between one's personal faith in God, for whom that's relevant, and our cultural traditions and norms and our texts, and we'll come to that tension shortly. Lastly, Rabbi Natasha.
Thank you, Dr. Daniella. I was I was raised in a mixed family, but I had a lot of religion in my life, but I also wasn't raised religious. I converted to Judaism as a teenager. My mother is English from a sort of Church of England, not very religious background. My father's from India. His parents are intermarried Sikh and Muslim. So I kind of had a slightly different upbringing, I think, to most people, in that I was surrounded by a lot of cultural traditions that were, very celebrated. We have Hindu cousins as well, and I felt very comfortable around a lot of different religious stuff from when I was young. But I didn't really have a religion. My parents didn't raise me in any of that. I was raised by, I think, very, liberal parents who were very into go and figure out who you are and we'll love you no matter what happens, which I think has led in my life to a certain amount of security in a lot of things that also I think reflects sexuality. That I didn't go through what I think a lot of people went through, where they were worried about what would happen when they told their parents that they weren't straight. I never really had that issue. I first dated a young woman when I was 14, and she met my mum, and it was great. And but I think, where a lot of this plays into life for me is that I'm very used to being in between spaces. I am a convert to Judaism. I am a mixed race individual, and I date people regardless of what their gender is. And I think that I've missed out on a lot of the angst to do with it. I'm very lucky to have not had to have dealt with a lot of the angst to do with a lot of that through my teenage years, really until I became an adult and realized that the entire world isn't quite as accepting and happy about everything as my own family are or have the potential to be. I became religious as a teenager, and became a part of New London Synagogue, which is where I now serve as a rabbi. And I think that the question of I also use the word queer. I think the question of my queerness is part of what made Masorti Judaism make the most sense to me, because I already knew by the time I was figuring out what my Jewish identity was going to look like, that it was going to have to look like something that would work well with my queer identity. So I kind of came at that in an opposite way, I think, to a lot of queer Jews, because I wasn't raised with Judaism and then trying to figure out how my sexuality was going to fit into it. I got to do the opposite, which I think is a privilege in some ways. I got to choose the space that I was going to be in religiously based on who I felt would be comfortable with me and who I would be comfortable with. I had, some angst around my late teens around orthodoxy, which was partly because I loved being surrounded by people who were going to yeshiva and wanted to talk about Judaism and God and Talmud all the time. And struggled to find that within the community that I already existed in, although I think it does very much exist. It's just in some Orthodox circles is easier to find, but never really took seriously the idea that I would go into the Orthodox world, partly because of sexuality issues, partly because of gender, because I also even though the Masorti community that I came into was not egalitarian at the time, I kind of always knew that it would. I did not always know that I would come back to be one of the rabbis there, but I knew that it would head in the direction of being egalitarian eventually. And I also had a couple of experiences within Orthodoxy that were quite racist when I was in my late teens. So I think in all of those sort of in-between spaces in which I existed, it wasn't going to work for me. I then got to go to Israel and study in yeshiva, and I've been very fortunate in my learning life. I think coming back to the UK has been hugely beneficial to me. I've loved being back here with the Masorti community after spending so much time abroad, and just feel really fortunate to be able to talk about these things. And I feel quite assured, I would say, that everything's going to be okay. I think part of what's different about being queer than being female or a bunch of other things that exist in my identity is that there's like a constant coming out that's involved in queerness. It's not that I came out when I was 14 and I've been out ever since. Actually, I'm constantly in conversations in which I'm coming out. And I would say, the vast majority of my experiences have not been negative ones. I do think that sometimes the negative experiences do kind of color a lot more than the positive experiences do. But thus far things have been pretty good. So I'm happy to end the intros on a very optimistic note there.
That's great. Thank you, Rabbi Natasha, and thank you everyone for sharing your journeys with us. We have about 20 minutes left and quite a few questions to get through. So what I'm going to do is maybe if we can do one rabbi per question. So I'm going to ask a question, and if you feel like you particularly, our panelists particularly want to answer this question, wave at me because I can see you all. Otherwise, I'm just going to pick on you, and I'm really sorry. Talking about struggle with our communities, I'm going to jump in at a really tough one. So every year we read in Leviticus a portion that condemns homosexuality using the word abomination. Now, aside from queer women being invisible within that is still where many people feel the bias against queer LGBT plus people comes from. So I am going to come to Rabbi Mikey, who is brilliantly waving in my direction, and ask what do you do with this? What do you as a rabbi and a congregational rabbi do with these texts?
So I love that pasuk. I love that verse with all my heart, as I love every other verse in the Torah. So a quick anecdote. So when I was at rabbinical school in JTS in New York, and I used to go to the same shul, Minyan Ma'at, which is one of the different services of the Anshe Chesed on the Upper West Side. And they would go around giving out the aliyot. You do one, you do two, like, which aliyah you're gonna get. And so the Gabba'it, she came around and said, you've got the fourth aliyah. So I didn't think anything of it. It was Achrei Mot Kedoshim. And then I'm just looking and thinking, but this is Achrei Mot Kedoshim. And what's the first verse that's there or whatever is, not sleeping man with another man. And so I'm thinking, okay, in this minyan, there's a number of professors from JTS as well. I think I was in my second year by that point. I said, well, I can't just go up and make the bracha for the aliyah and not say anything. Everybody knows who I am. The only reason why I was at JTS and not Schechter is because I'm gay. And so I said whatever I said, something to the effect about loving the psukim, but the idea of interpretation being really important. And that's what's special to being Masorti. Growing up in Orthodoxy, which is one of the problems, is that if this is what it says, that's what it means. If that's the way we've always explained it since Moses was given the Torah on Mount Sinai, and being in the Masorti movement, and whilst not having known, but being a disciple of British Masorti as well, and Rabbi Louis Jacobs, who was my my mother's rabbi in Manchester growing up, understanding that Torah le Moshe mi Sinai, the Torah was given to Moshe on the Mount Sinai, does not mean exactly every word as has been interpreted until today. But the words are there, and we can't change the words, but we can understand that they've been given a human interpretation, and God does not speak in Hebrew or English or any other language. It's all at the very beginning an interpretation, if you want, by Moses, or if you want, by the people who wrote the Torah when it was written. And therefore, the construct of two men sleeping together was something that was unacceptable, whether it was for social reasons, whether it was for religious reasons, because it was used by other religions as a way of praying to their gods, etc. But we know in the 21st century, already in the end of last century, that being LGBTQ and any other type of forms of understanding the fluidity of sexuality and gender is something that is real, and that people didn't have that understanding. And therefore, as Rambam, as Maimonides said, that if there's something in the Torah that we think doesn't make sense, and just means we haven't understood it properly. And I really take those as being religious ways of understanding, because as I can't remember who said, but God loves us all. And it's like, I never had a problem with God. The problem is with people. And I think that's really, really true. And I believe that with my whole self, which is why I'm a Masorti rabbi, not perhaps say a Reform rabbi. That's mine.
Thank you. Thank you. Not an easy question. Well done in not very many minutes. And that's the aim. Let's see if we can get through lots of questions in not many minutes. So thank you, Rav Mikey, for getting us started on that. Next question, very different one, and we had it in from a few people, including, I've just had it sent to me again now. What can Masorti rabbinic leadership do to ensure that our communities are inclusive of and supportive of trans and gender non-conforming members and potential members? Does anyone on the panel particularly want to answer this question? Rabbi Natasha.
One of the things I've been, a couple of things I've been surprised at. I haven't been a rabbi for very long. One of the things I've been surprised at coming here, I suppose because I believe that I'm the only queer identifying rabbi in the movement, is that I get emails quite often actually from people who want to talk about gender. From people who are trans and are thinking about joining a Masorti shul and that kind of stuff, which I'm very touched that people feel comfortable talking to me about it. And there's also a certain embarrassment that I feel that people feel the need to ask. And I do think that we do need to get a little bit more in front of that, because I don't get asked very often. I'm a person in a same-sex relationship. Will I be welcome in this shul? That's not a question that I get very much, because I think that we've figured out how to be in front of some of that in a way that makes it clearer, maybe not as clear as it could be, but clearer to people that they will be welcome. And we haven't crossed that threshold when it's come to gender issues in that way. But I also think that sometimes we move more slowly than we could because we're scared of something that doesn't exist as much as we think it does, which is that we're scared that that people are going to riot because we allow certain things to happen. I recently was in a services committee meeting at New London in which we talked about how to call someone up to Torah in a non-gendered fashion that went like this. This is how we could do it. Here's how the grammar works. And then everyone went, oh, okay, that's how we'll do it then. And I kind of had this, this expectation, which I actually now think was really patronizing, that I was going to have to explain to people why it was important that we have a system for how to call someone up to Torah without needing to gender them as masculine or feminine. And it turns out that actually it really wasn't as hard as I thought it was. So I think, one thing that we need to do is stop patronizing our members into thinking that they can't handle change. Actually, they can handle change a lot better than we think they can a lot of the time. Will there be some tension and pushback? Probably yes. but I'm willing to bet, you know, I think I've come across as very optimistic from the start here, but I think I have reason to be optimistic, which is that people often do rise to challenges when we put challenges in front of people, and this is one that's well worth doing, because it's about the humanity of people around us, and what could be more Jewish than accepting everyone as human and as being made b'tselem Elokim. That's me.
Thank you so much. Thank you for contributing to a conversation that doesn't often happen in the open. We have very few minutes left, so I think I'm going to do 2 more questions, and I know there's loads more coming in, so I think we're going to think about doing follow-ups to this. There are tons of questions coming in. So I'm going to go first to Rabbi Kerry, and then we'll end with Rabbi Aaron. So Rabbi Kerry, I'd like to ask you a question about marriage ceremony. So in the UK, we have the Masorti movement has something called Shutafot, which is a partnership ceremony. We had a few members of our network asking, why do we have a partnership ceremony and not a marriage ceremony, as couples who identify as a man and a woman marrying each other would have? And I don't know what the equivalent is there, but in 3 minutes, I would love to hear your thoughts on this.
Yeah, 3 minutes on this, you got it. So first of all, if you found somebody that you want to marry, great job. Like, that's so hard. I'm not saying everybody needs to, but if that's your journey and you have found somebody, like, amazing. I think we're all here to meet one another in our loneliness and be together. So that's amazing. And I don't know what the reasoning is of, you know, the Masorti movement in England, of why the Shutafut is preferred over Kiddushin. My experience has been that, I mean, there are tshuvot, there are rabbinical rulings that make Kiddushin accessible, and it's usually up to, my experience has been, it's up to the individual rabbis to decide if they're going to do it or not. The resistance is, I mean, in some ways understandable, because, like, I feel like I'm losing something and I want to hang on to it, I'm going to hang on to it, maybe into irrationality. And we're always having existential crises as Jews, and so sometimes we hang on to ideas and laws that don't work, that don't make sense, because this kind of existential threat that's kind of working in us, and I honor that, as much as it also pisses me off. In my own wedding, we did Kiddushin in my wedding, and what we did was we acquired the responsibilities in the ketubah. So we did not acquire one another. One of us did not acquire the other. We acquired the responsibilities in the ketubah. So what I'm saying is, there are ways to do Kiddushin. I don't know what the resistance is in your particular areas, and the people you're negotiating with. And I will say this, as I've reflected on it after, and I've been married now 10 years, and reflecting on it, I'm also not sure, like, I think as queer folks, it's worthwhile asking ourselves, why is that important to us, right? Like, for some of us, I think, yes, like, marriage, that's what I want. But for some of us, it's like, no, I just want the option, and let me in. And is that the world I actually think is the world we want? Is the Kiddushin world the world I want to live in, where people kind of acquire people? Or is it a different world I want to live in? Because, you know, sometimes we look at this like, how do I get in? And I think there's another way to look at it, which is, what is it that Masorti Judaism can learn from queerness, that maybe our boundaries can expand a little bit, and how we think about partnership and marriage can expand a little bit. And that might be something queerness can bring to Masorti Judaism, because we have stuff to offer to the Jewish world, just as the Jewish world has stuff to offer to the queer world. So, you know, I didn't quite answer the question, but maybe touched on a few different concerns that come up in it.
Thank you, and you know, I think you did, because I think there's a lot of tensions there, and in the UK, it's not, as far as I'm aware, there aren't Masorti shuls that will do Kiddushin for same-sex couples. But the response that I have heard is maybe the problem is with the ceremony that we have already, rather than with queer Jews. Maybe everyone should be thinking about having a shotafot, is the response I've heard. So thank you, Rabbi Kerry, for really inputting into that conversation. We're going to come to Rabbi Aaron in a moment. I want to also have the chance to quickly draw your attention to a message that Rabbi Oliver has put into the chat, because tomorrow evening, as part of his 20 questions series with New North London, he's interviewing Seb Rubenstein about his transition. So Rabbi Oliver, if you could just make it really clear to us how we sign up to that, that would be great. Thank you. Final question for Rabbi Aaron. We have, I think, about 4 minutes left. So if we can do it in 3, that would be great. Is how do you respond when you encounter resistance to change within your community?
You know, I'm really grateful that, you know, I've been here 8.5 years. I have not encountered, you know, real resistance to change, but I think a real openness and curiosity. And I want to go back to something that Rabbi Kerry shared. You know, and the way I think about it is, instead of, you know, whomever is in the center going to the margins and dragging people from the margins into the center, to actually like really go to the margins and hang out at the margins, and to learn what comes up there. And in the context of queer identity and Judaism, that there's a lot that queer people think about or deconstruct around binaries that would be helpful. So I can't tell you really the last time I talked about issues of LGBTQ identity starting with Leviticus 18. You know, it's part of a conversation, it can be, but I think we can start to shift and decide, where do we start the conversation? Where do we situate the conversation? If we continue to reinforce certain binaries, then that's what will come. But if we imagine a different world when we talk about trans identity or any kind of LGBTQ identity, what are the texts we want to start from? And to not just go back to the same texts because that's what's been presented to us, but to say, here's our experience, and let's study Benot Tzlov and the protest within the Torah for inheritance. Let's start there when we have a conversation. And I think when we do that, that affects our conversations about marriage. You know, we do Kiddushin in our congregation for couples of the same gender, opposite genders. But we also ask the question, like Kerry was asking, you know, what is it that you're trying to draw out of and prioritize in your relationship? And how do we shift to an egalitarian ceremony? So when we were going through that conversation as a congregation, we didn't want to end up with a second-class situation, which I think, you know, the conservative movement, at least in the United States, and its progress toward inclusion kind of said, well, you know, gay people can't help being gay, so we're going to do acrobatics to find a way. And I guess I'm just not interested in that anymore. I'm not interested in being included by somebody else. I'm not interested in perpetuating that model. And I think when we push those binaries and push our text choices and push our whatever it is we're teaching or doing, we're actually reshaping what our communities look like. And transformation is what I'm more interested than just being included.
Thank you, Rabbi Aaron. We have but seconds left, so that was brilliant. Thank you to everyone at Masorti Judaism for being so enthusiastic about this and about the network. If you want to get involved in the network, email lgbt+@masorti.org.uk. If you're interested in being an ally, also email. We're going to do something on Pride. We do things at least every month. So please get in touch. But thank you most of all to our 4 panelists who made the time across 4 different time zones to be with us today. We're incredibly grateful, and we hope that you will allow us to have you back at some point to extend the conversation, because we really valued your input. So thank you very much.